and welcome to yet another episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast. My name's Chris, and today we're going to be breaking down Cage Warriors 173, which took place last night in San Diego. It was a slim 8-fight card, not a great amount of credible needle-moving stuff happened, which is, usually the case with these San Diego cards, but there were some cool moments. There were some great fights on this card. So let's jump right in, as we always do with the main event. We'll work our way down, as always, to the first fight on the prelims. It's probably going to be a quick one today because, again, only 8 fights, and not a great deal to break down, which is nice because I've done breakdowns of 16 fight cards and 17 fight cards. So having 8 is, I guess, a welcome change of pace. Bruno Souza versus Wilson Hayes was the main event of Cage Warriors 173. Wilson Hayes, obviously, you've listened to this podcast long enough. I've got pretty much the same circle of people and group of people that listen to this. So anyone who's followed me, anyone who listens to this, Wilson Hayes is my guy, man. 39 years of age, fight number 42. He's been fighting since 2007, coming off an amazing submission win over Toby Misek in February earlier in the year, which he actually scored a knockdown into the submission and almost had his first ever career knockout. You think about that, like 42 fights, no knockouts for a guy that's actually pretty heavy-handed. We've seen him drop numerous people, and without going into this fight too soon, we certainly saw him drop Bruno Souza in this one as well. Speaking of Souza, of course, he's of UFC and karate combat fame, former LFA featherweight champion as well. Lost twice in the UFC and then got cut. He's more well known for being the protege of Lyoto Machida, and in his most recent MMA bout, he actually fought Teruto Ishihara, of course, again a former UFC fighter. So this fight was actually really fucking fun, and I don't know. I didn't watch it live. I didn't watch any of this card live because of the time difference, but watched it this morning, and after I saw the fights, I always go seeing what people have said. People complaining that this fight was boring or that it was crap. I don't know, like what else you want from MMA. You've got, you had a pretty textbook stylistic clash here. Wilson Hayes, the grappler, the heavy-handed grappler, and Bruno Souza, the elusive counter striker, karateka, great at timing his shots, great at fighting with that little bounce step as well. And we actually got an awesome display from both guys, I thought. I scored it 29-28 to Souza, and I believe all 3 judges did too. Unanimous decision win for Bruno Souza. But what I loved from him was the check hook was clean all night long. The counter knees, the step in knees. What was great about them was that Wilson Hayes wasn't trying to mix anything up. Like he wanted to put hands on Souza and get him on the ground. And he spent the whole damn fight trying to close the distance. And he did have some success, and we'll talk about that. But certainly in round 1, you saw like the best of Bruno Souza, in my opinion. Loved it. Like the timing he had on his shots, like every time Wilson Hayes tried to close the distance, just those beautiful counter knees whenever Hayes would come close. Hayes had a nice Superman punch. Like he was trying to do, some elusive stuff to close the distance, but Souza was just, I don't know, he's like a man possessed in that first round. I loved it. Like the uppercut. There was a moment actually, speaking of uppercuts, like he landed an uppercut, followed up with like 2 roundhouse kicks to the body, and it really just felt like it was target practice for Souza. Um, Great moments as well for him were like the stab kicks to the thigh, stab kicks to the body, really just digging his toes into the midsection of Wilson Hayes, who, fair play to the guy, he's almost 40. He didn't wilt once in this fight. He didn't crumble once in this fight. By the end of the fight, he looked less tired, actually. He seemed so good at 145. He's obviously completely, mismatched in terms of size because, again, he's a former flyweight. I think he's 5'4". It's, you're going to come against guys like Souza, who has like a 7-inch reach advantage. You're going to struggle to close the distance. Probably my favorite moment of this fight was was when Bruno Souza dropped Wilson Hayes with a back elbow, like a really stunning back elbow. Cast your minds back to Anderson Silva, Tony Frickland, just gorgeous technique, and he completely dropped Hayes, and that was pretty much as the round ended there. Round 2, Wilson Hayes started to close the distance a lot better, using the uppercut to dive in on a double leg. Souza actually did a good job stuffing the wrestling approach from Hayes. But what he wasn't really prepared for was the judo throws from Hayes. Uchimata in there, Haragoshi. It was beautiful from Wilson Hayes. Landed two in this round and really impactful, like slam trips. Like the stuff that should be scoring in terms of damage, because he was like fucking thudding Bruno Souza on the mat. But he kept losing the position when he got there. Bruno Souza landing good elbows on the ground to get back to his feet. His movement was so clean. So comfortable fighting backwards. Stabbing kicks to the body, like I said, were good. Also mixing it up, right? Like question mark kick to the head. It looked like for the whole fight he was trying to land something nasty. And then speaking of, things landing and things being nasty, there was a counter knee from Souza, ripped a right hook to the body, and then out of nowhere, Wilson Hayes just shellacked him with an overhand left. The same strike that sat down Toby Misek in the last fight that Wilson Hayes had back in Feb. And Wilson Hayes followed him to the ground, started landing strikes, and then the bell went to signal the end of the round. So I scored it 10-9 that round to Wilson Hayes. Even though Souza did some amazing stuff, Wilson Hayes was getting his licks in. He was, getting those impactful takedowns, not just takedowns for the sake of holding a guy down, but really, slamming a guy on his back and on his head. There were some good moments for Wilson Hayes. And then the knockdown, I felt, stole it for him. And I think the judges did too. I assume that's where the fact that everyone scored it 29-28 for Souza, myself included, I assume that round two is the one that was scored for Wilson Hayes. Round three, I actually think was a super close round. I don't think there's an argument that Hayes won it, but I think the first half of the round was all Wilson Hayes. Bruno Souza still looked dazed from the knockdown. He was no longer pressing forward. In fact, Wilson Hayes was kind of walking him down for half the round, managing to get Souza up against the fence. But Souza, in fairness to him, while he did slow down, still very smart as well, like still cognizant of what was going on in the cage. When he was pressed against the fence, managing to counter off the back foot just as Hayes was about to pin him, circling out. Souza did really well in this fight, being conscious of the cage, right? Like aware of where he is in the cage. Really good footwork, which you'd expect from a karate guy, but sometimes you run the risk karate guys, they move forward or they move backwards, and sometimes you lose that lateral movement in MMA. Certainly, some of the greats that doesn't apply to, but you do see it with other karate fighters, especially if you're watching like JMMA as well. A lot of karate guys transition to MMA with the ring, especially, but even in the cage, you do see them kind of not really move laterally and kind of get backed up a lot. And Bruno Souza did a great job not getting backed up, not getting himself caught against the fence, which is what Hayes wanted. Was to get Souza up against the fence so he could make it dirty, close the distance, nullify the range advantage of Souza. But, halfway through round three, Souza kind of got his wherewithal again. Lovely work countering the hip toss multiple times that Wilson Hayes tried to get that hip toss. Souza reversing positions on the fence, landing some good shots as well. Really stunning uppercut in this that really snapped Hayes' head up. Knees to the head, stabbing kicks to the body again. His output might have lowered in round three, but he still landed the best shots, and he ended the round with a really massive knee to the head of Wilson Hayes. I scored it 29-28 Souza. Pretty much everyone else did. I wouldn't mind seeing him like right up there in title shot contention at 145 pounds. I think for Hardwick it presents a very interesting test because you fight a karate guy, you're really going to have a bit of hesitance on the feet, or you might even not want to overcommit, or again that might freeze you as well, and not wanting to overcommit, you might not commit at all. For someone like Harry, who is all about output, all about pressing forward, I think that'd be a really interesting fight. However, while I think it would be good for Harry to fight someone who's fought in the UFC, I think it would be a good name for him to add to his belt. At the same time, like I kept saying in the last episode, like it needs to be Jordan Vucenic, in my opinion. That's the fight I want to see. It's got to be Jordan Vucenic for the belt or Luke Riley. Simple as that. But Bruno Souza definitely up there in title contention for sure. Will they do it? I'm not too certain. I think that by the time Harry Hardwick has his next title fight, I think it'll be too soon for Souza, who's just had a 3-round fight where he did get dropped, where he might have to take a bit of time off. But again, really awesome main event. I don't know why people shout on it. But, well, I say people, it was minority. It was just a few people online. But I don't know. I don't know how you watch that and don't find it interesting. A guy who's got a really deep toolbox for striking, a guy versus a guy who's a massive fucking veteran and an absolute dog in the cage. I thought it was a really good fight. In the co-main event, we had Javier Garcia versus Roberto Hernandez. And guys, I'm not going to sugarcoat this one bit. Anyone who knows me knows this, right? I've been watching MMA for a very, very, very long time, right? Like before Connor, before Brock, before all of these trends, right? Like I've been watching MMA for a very long time. One thing I will always avoid doing is calling a fight a robbery, right? I very, very rarely call a fight a robbery. Why? Because I've watched a lot of fucking fights, and people cry robbery for two reasons, right? They cry robbery because they lost a bet, or they cry robbery because they haven't watched enough fights and they see a bad decision and they assume it's a robbery. Not all bad decisions are robberies, right? There has to be a distinction made there because it's really fucking annoying. Every time someone loses in a, you know, even if it's a fight where it's kind of clear that yeah, this guy probably won a couple of rounds, that doesn't mean it was a robbery, right? Robberies, we're talking like someone winning 30-27 across the board when they didn't even get a single round. Now, having said that, I will put my cards down on this one. I think this was very close to robbery, and actually, push comes to shove, if someone had to really push me for it, I do think it was a robbery. I think Roberto Hernandez got absolutely hosed on the scorecards in this one. Um, Bit of context before we go into that: Javier Garcia, LFA veteran, 10-5 as a pro, making his Cage Warriors debut. Just missed out on like a being on tough, which whatever. Um, if that matters to anyone. Most recent fight was overturned to a no contest, and it was for gold in LFA. So he's been there. He's fought for gold a couple of times. I'm pretty sure. In fact, I'm not pretty sure. I'm 100% certain. Him and Bruno Souza, who's in the main event, they fought for the title in LFA a few years back, and Bruno Souza won. So Javier Garcia has been there or thereabouts in a very respected promotion like LFA. So Cage Warriors debut for him against Roberto Hernandez, who last time we saw him, he lost very handily to Liam Gittins via fifth round submission, and that was in a title fight, one of the best performances of the year for Liam Gittins. Hernandez is awesome, 9-2 coming into this fight. Was on a 9-fight win streak before losing to Gittins, so lost his first ever fight as a pro, and then rattled off 9 straight before losing to Gittins. So Roberto Hernandez is awesome, and he's also moved back up to featherweight. So he looked a bit drained at 135. His gas tank wasn't there. This is his weight class. So about the decision. So why is it contentious? I've watched it twice now, right? I watched it this morning and then I watched it this afternoon. I'm recording for context 5 p.m. on Saturday. So I trying not to like rage too much because it's probably not even that deep, but it's still someone's livelihood, right? And I think it needs to be spoken about, right? This isn't a pro. We cover Cage Warriors, we cover that aspect of it because I've been following Cage Warriors for a long time and I enjoy talking about European MMA, but we're not paid by Cage Warriors. We're not represented or representing Cage Warriors in any way. We're just it's what I do is just an analysis podcast, a fan podcast, if you have it. So I don't have any obligation to come here and kind of defend the judges on the night or defend anyone really. It wasn't good, guys. I thought round one was the consensus clearest round of the entire fight. I scored it 10-9 to Roberto Hernandez. Love the jab to the body. I always say it. Roberto Hernandez is one of the best body snatchers in Cage Warriors. He's got a great straight to the body, and Javier Garcia was struggling, straight up struggling in the first round. Hernandez 1-2 down the pipe was money, then threw the 3 behind it as well, which was really nice. Roberto Hernandez was walking away with this fight in round one. Round two, Hernandez again, jab, 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 just kept it in Garcia's face all round long. Garcia, this is where I think things might have been skewed a bit, and I should probably talk about it actually, because Garcia dropped, and this is where we need to be careful. Garcia landed a shot in round one that knocked Hernandez off balance. Didn't drop him, knocked him off balance, which was evidenced by the fact that Javier Garcia didn't press him when he fell over. and just waited for him to get back to his feet. It's very clearly not a knockdown. My concern is that this fight was lost for Roberto Hernandez because two judges thought that there was a knockdown in round one. You would assume that there'd be a bit more wherewithal there, especially you've got a guy like Chris Lieben scoring, and Chris Lieben actually scored it to Javier Garcia. You'd assume someone with fighting experience and combat sports experience would be able to see make a calculated decision in the moment against that being a knockdown. That might be what happened. I don't know the round by round breakdown. However, that wasn't a knockdown. So Roberto Hernandez took the first round. Second round, like I said, keeping the jab in Garcia's face. I think he fought really well in the second round. He did slow down, and Javier Garcia kept doing this thing in the fight where he would flurry and then he'd walk backwards. He'd flurry again, then he'd walk backwards. But every time he did it, Roberto Hernandez was out of range. And Javier Garcia was swinging and missing a lot, like a hell of a lot in the first two rounds. Hernandez was dotting him up with the jab, dotting him up with the shots to the body, digging the right hook to the body, then going upstairs. Roberto Hernandez was was leading the dance, sorry, and landing the absolute basic fundamentals, the straight hand, the jab. He was boxing Javier Garcia. 2018, right? That was the scorecard going into round three, in my opinion. I don't, unless you believe that round one had a knockdown, which it didn't. I'm ready to argue that with anyone. I don't know how the fuck you can score anything other than 2018 Hernandez going into round three. Round three then becomes irrelevant to me. Round three was clearly, or not clearly, it was likely a Garcia round. And I know a lot of people online scored it for Hernandez. I thought Garcia took it because Hernandez really slowed down. The body jab was still there, but Garcia was started to land his own jab, was starting to press forward and land in combination. He wasn't just winging shots, he was starting to land a couple of good shots. Every time he committed to stepping forward, he had Hernandez compromised. He kept kicking the calf away. Hernandez started to struggle with that lead leg. His movement was compromised. And I thought that Javier Garcia did enough damage, especially to the lead leg, where, okay, round three is his. But that's still 29-28 Hernandez. Garcia got his hand raised, split decision. I genuinely have no idea how. I have a theory, and I think that that's probably why. I just think it's a shocking decision. I think it's really poor, and it's a shame for Roberto Hernandez, who, for the first time in his career, loses two in a row. Um, in a fight where he should have got his hand raised against a really good competitor in Javier Garcia. I'm not here to say anything against Javier Garcia. He fought a fight, right? He fought a fight. He stayed in a fight, and he won the third round. And he was competitive. But those first two rounds were clearly Roberto Hernandez. I don't know what you guys think. Feel free to tweet me, message me on Insta. Um, how did you score the fight? Because yeah, I can't. I've watched it twice. I can't see an argument for Javier Garcia unless the judges on the night believe that there was a knockdown in round one, which there wasn't. Um, but yeah, I guess Javier Garcia potentially this is kind of like a he uses Cage Warriors as kind of a stepping stone for another promotion soon. Maybe obviously there's rumors of the UFC. Clearly they had their eyes on him if he'd been on the Ultimate Fighter. I'm sure beating a guy like Roberto Hernandez looks great on his record. Um, but if he does return, I think it would be interesting to see him in the UK, in Europe, fighting some good guys at 145 pounds. But as for Roberto Hernandez, one of those where I'm sure it fucking stings, but he'll know who won that fight, and that will spur him on to come back and in. I will say Roberto Hernandez didn't set the world alight in this fight. He wasn't by any stretch of the imagination as good as he has been in the past, but he was good enough to win the fight, and I thought he won. So props to him. Yeah, like I said, it's probably going to sting for him, but I'm sure we'll see him again in due time. The people's main event was no doubt Brandon Carrillo versus Damon Wilson. Before the fight, I went on record to say that for me, this has fight of the year potential. I wanted to go a bit above fight of the night because I know what Damon Wilson's like, and we've not really had an incredible amount of contenders for fight of the year so far, almost halfway through the year. So I figured this one might have been that, and look, it lived up to the expectation. It's certainly not fight of the year, but it was a damn good fight. Carrillo returning to the Yellow Gloves after losing to Corvin Allen in December last year. 3-2 as a pro against Damon Wilson here, 6-2 as a pro. One of my favorite fighters out of the San Diego scene. I think his pace is mad. His striking is brilliant. Any guy who goes to the body with consistency is always someone I'll keep an eye on. So Damon Wilson, it's good to see him back. It's been a year since we'd last seen him, and he looked absolutely incredible in this fight. Um, Scored it 30-27 to him. Carrillo, he was in the fight and he showed great determination and grit to stay in the fight for all 15 minutes. But it was all Damon Wilson in this. I absolutely loved the stutter stepping that he was doing, like almost stutter stepping into his kicks. A lot of feints, giving Carrillo a lot of problems on the feet. Feinting the uppercut to land the straight hand, dig into the body, like I said, stutter stepping into a power jab. There were so many awesome things he did in round one where I felt like Carrillo was really overwhelmed by Damon Wilson's striking arsenal. Carrillo's swinging off the back foot, don't get me wrong, but Wilson was in and out without absorbing much in that first round. Carrillo did land a really good right hand down the pipe and rushed Wilson to take him down. Wilson jumped for like this huge knee. That dude almost leapt out of the fucking cage. It was amazing. But like I said, it was all Damon Wilson in that first round. Carrillo, this was probably Carrillo's best round in terms of he was still mildly competitive and he was landing, throwing in combination. Sorry, he wasn't landing, but he was throwing in combination. He was still dangerous, even though Damon Wilson was starting to put a pace on him. Round two was probably Damon Wilson's best round, in my opinion. Uh, Immediately rushing Carrillo on the front foot. Like the guy's an absolute aggressor in the cage. Like that pressure fighting is his bag. And crisp right hand. Carrillo, you know, wasn't ever comfortable fighting off the back foot in this fight, really. He kept reactively just punching in combination whenever he felt that Damon Wilson was super close to him. But Wilson was backing him up with the 1-2, landing knees to the body. Carrillo had a moment here where he had a rear naked choke. There were a couple of submission attempts for him where Wilson was mildly in trouble and could have been in more trouble. Carrillo did attack a rear naked choke. He was completely under the jaw, but didn't have his hooks in. And it's the fundamentals on the ground that actually cost Carrillo in this fight because Wilson just managed to strip the hands and return the fight to the feet. And it was all, Damon Wilson had some awesome head movement on the feet, really kind of styling and stunting on Carrillo. Carrillo was winging and missing big time. And then Wilson just put his foot on the gas, ripping hooks to the body, knees to the body, hooks up top. Carrillo was slowing down in this round, like looking extremely labored. I felt Wilson was absolutely breaking him. Another takedown attempt from Carrillo, completely out of desperation. And then Wilson had his own rear naked choke attempt, but kind of ran out of time. So had it 2018 Wilson going into round three. In round three, Wilson just rushed across the cage, immediately got Carrillo down. Carrillo attacked the neck for the guillotine. Not a bad neck attack, but he didn't have his hooks in. Again, like he wasn't controlling Wilson's body. Like he was attacking the neck and nothing else. You do that, you're especially, well, not even especially in MMA, in jiu-jitsu as well. Like you take a guy's neck, but you don't have the correct setup with your legs, you're losing the battle because they're going to be able to just turn into you and get on top. And that's what Wilson did. Wilson simply just rolled out again. But a wicked pace again in this round. Wilson just tireless, knees to the body, elbows away at the head of Carrillo from mount position. When they got to the ground again, he just put a fucking pace on Carrillo. And like I said, props to Carrillo for surviving as long as he did. In the final 15 seconds of the fight, Wilson landed a huge knee to the body and an elbow over the top. It takes two to tango, and Carrillo stood there and took the best of Wilson and didn't fade, right? But Damon Wilson, man, when this guy's on it, he's so damn good. Improves to 7-2 at 145 pounds. Let's get this guy back over. I'm going to say this a lot because I want to see these guys in the UK. I want to see them in Europe fighting Europe's best. I don't want to see Damon Wilson against a guy who's 3-2, even though the guy's exciting. I want to see him tested against better opposition in the UK and in Europe. The San Diego scene is great for what it is, but the talent pool is so well, I guess not the talent pool, but like the pool is so big, all of the good guys are elsewhere. And what's left is, every once in a while you do get a Damon Wilson, you do get a Roberto Hernandez, but the guys that are left, sometimes they're just not at that level. And I would love to see Damon Wilson in Europe against, he fought Carrillo. That was really fun. I'd love to see him against other 145ers this side of the Atlantic. Xavier Vines versus Diego Bigelow. This actually had my favorite performance of the night, which was Xavier Vines. Vines has always impressed in the yellow gloves, in my opinion. Although coming off a loss to Corvin Allen earlier in the year, his debut against Miguel Painber was really good. Bigelow, on the other hand, making his Cage Warriors debut, 2-2 as a pro, 4-4 as an amateur. So someone who can win and he can also lose. But Xavier Vines, man, a lot of the first and second round of this fight, he was trying to establish a grappling game, and he was doing really well. Like he was getting Bigelow down, and he was controlling the fight, and he was doing some good things on the ground. But Bigelow was really crafty on the ground, like some awesome scrambles, kicking the lock leg in the body triangle to scramble out of position. I thought was really good. Using the fence to walk his way out of being on the bottom. Vines had a moment as well where he used the fence to walk along it and attack an arm lock. There was some great scrambles on the mat. But what I loved about Xavier Vines, why it was my favorite performance of the night, was the guy's striking was so good. Um, Vines just kept switching stances, especially in combination, right? Like he'd land, switch, land again. And that was really causing a lot of disruption for Bigelow. Like the rhythm was just completely cut off for him because of that. The stepping elbow from Vines was so good. He was really baffling Bigelow a lot and just dotting him up on the feet. I had him up 2018 going into the third. In the third round, landed a huge head kick, elbows and knees against the fence on Bigelow. Bigelow's chin, he hung in there really well. But Vines, what I liked about Vines as well wasn't just what was coming from him offensively. It's also the defensive stuff. Like if you watch that fight, how many times did Vines slip the jab, counter with the left hook, slip the jab, counter with the hook, slip the jab, counter with something else? He was in this fight offensively and defensively. Bigelow was game as hell. Like props to the guy. He was really fun. But Vines ending the round with a spinning back elbow into a straight left hand just summed it up for him. Really, stylish, crafty, exciting performance from him. He's 3-2, which won't it isn't a record that excites many people, but he's still early into his career. His Muay Thai and his kickboxing is awesome. I think there's a future for this guy, and someone that I will personally follow for a very long time because if someone can strike to that level in MMA, it's always someone worth following. And clearly, the grappling is something that he's working on and wanting to exhibit in fights because for a round and a half, he really took a heavy grappling approach as well. Can't wait to see him again. We then had Magomed Bayduev versus James Settle. Bayduev 5-1 as a pro, missed weight coming into this fight by 2 pounds, but debuting in the yellow gloves. James Settle, again, one of my favorite guys in the San Diego scene, might not have the most attractive record at 5-5 coming into this, but always exciting. He's got a crisp kickboxing base and some really slick Brazilian jiu-jitsu, making his sixth appearance actually here in the yellow gloves for this fight and coming off a knockout win against Johnny Gill in December last year. Bayduev, you look at his name, you look at his record, and you're like, holy crap, this guy's going to come in and smoke James Settle. And then if you look at, Tapology or Sherdog, you see, oh, he won by rear naked choke. That was probably something that was supposed to happen. Sure. But what we saw in this was actually Bayduev looked human. James Settle landed some really good strikes early. The calf kicks obviously were causing Bayduev a little bit of some hesitance in the striking department. But Settle was countering well, like left hand counter was nice. But here's the problem. James Settle only moved backwards the whole fight and didn't move his head off the center line. And if you do that against a guy who all he's going to do is jab away at your head and then get a single or a double and get you down, that's going to cost you. So in round one, I scored it 10-9 to Bayduev. Again, his jab was clean. Anything he threw down the middle landed, and he realized that in the second round, rattled James Settle with a big left hand, a straight left hand down the pipe. Bayduev realized pretty much that striking in combination is liable to land in a big way. James Settle's main form of defense is to pull backwards. And if the jab didn't land, Bayduev would just put something else behind it, close distance, and it would land. And that kind of spelled the end of the fight for James Settle. Bayduev eventually got the fight down to the ground with a double leg. Um, Settle threw his legs up for a triangle. Bayduev broke the posture and just started to apply heavy pressure on top. Tossed him over for the half guard, side control, managed to climb the back of James Settle and, got him down, locked in the body triangle, attacked the rear naked choke, and that was pretty much all she wrote. The Russian improves to 6-1. A great Cage Warriors debut. James Settle put in a good performance, but if you're offensively, James Settle's always going to be fun. Defensively is the reason why he's 5-6. He's fun as hell, but Bayduev did to him what he was supposed to, but he also did get clipped quite a lot in round one, did Bayduev. So I'm really excited to follow this guy's career, see where it takes him next. Will we see him again? I hope so in the yellow gloves. I'm sure there's a lot of fun fights for him, especially him being Russian. Like I'm sure they can set up more fights for him domestically as opposed to all of these fights being for him being in San Diego. I hope that's not the case. But let's swiftly move on to the prelims. Chandrick Kindle versus Sean Rose. Listen, I'm not a fan of heavyweights. You guys know this. Not that I'm not a fan of heavyweights. I'm not a fan of MMA heavyweights. It's just something that doesn't really excite me. But I will always respect a heavyweight that is merciful and gives us a quick finish. So props to Sean Rose in this one. We've seen him in the yellow gloves. He's very fun. I will say that he's put on some good performances when he's been in the cage. And this one was a weird one because Kindle is now 0-3, is really overweight and not fit at all to be fighting. Like he's just actually not fit. You look at Sean Rose, okay, this is a big fucking dude. Chandrick Kindle came in at 227 pounds, 30 pounds difference between him and Sean Rose. Sean Rose was massive and, massive because he has to be. Chandrick Kindle is massive because he's probably enjoys eating and doesn't enjoy exercising as much. But in this one, it was a pretty quick one. Sean Rose basically dropped Kindle with a calf kick as Kindle was about to kick as well, so just knocked him off balance, followed him down to the ground, punched away at his head for 2.5 minutes, and the referee decided he'd seen enough. Rose gets his first W in the yellow gloves, which is always nice to see. But Kindle, man, I don't know. He could easily fight at 205. I don't know. Maybe they throw him on another card. I have no idea. Not a guy that excites me, but Sean Rose, props to him. It improves to 2-2 and finally gets his win in Cage Warriors. We'll quickly rattle through the final two fights, which were the first two fights on the card. Joseph Perez versus Anthony Desilva. Perez making his Cage Warriors debut and actually won his pro debut back in December, so comes into this fight 1-0 against Anthony Desilva, who also comes in 1-0, technically 2-0, but one of his fights was flagged for legitimacy issues due to his opponent's record. But 5-1 as an amateur, so clearly someone with a very exciting base and clearly someone who's very good. What he did to Joseph Perez was basically murder. Perez was actually active early and quite impressive early, Joseph Perez, flurrying 1-2, following up with a calf kick and then a Superman punch. But Desilva was the one pressing forward the whole time. Guy seems like a really good kicker, like zero telegraph on his kicks, and his hip dexterity is all the way there. Like he was partially landing high kicks and head kicks that had like nothing on them. You couldn't see it coming basically. I like the roundhouse to the body that he was landing in there, clocking Perez with a 1-2, and then really dropped him with a straight left hand, followed up with punches and elbows on the ground. His mouthpiece came out, did Perez's. Even though Perez was attacking the leg and trying to, fish for something, Desilva was basically like cool, passed into mount, and Perez managed to scramble back to his feet, which was awesome. But mouthpiece still wasn't in his mouth. And Desilva goes high with a head kick, which I actually, even though Perez blocked it, seemed to kind of scramble him a little bit. And then a left hand right behind that head kick wobbled him, and the right hand against the fence just knocked Perez out clean, especially with no mouthpiece. Like that's a nasty KO in general. Those ones were against the fence where they just like fold and fall backwards into the cage is bad enough. But when they've not got their mouthpiece in as well, it's just doubles in how like viscerally nasty it is. Anthony Desilva, man, I'm all over this guy. Like I'm ready to see him again. He seems really fun, really exciting. 155 pounds, always a fun weight class. Hyped to see what this guy does next. He's 2-0 now, technically 3-0, but we'll go 2-0 for official records purposes. Yeah, can't wait to see what he does next. All right, and then the last fight we'll talk about is Ilyas Fakiri versus Chris Owen. Chris Owen stepping in on 24 hours notice actually to make his pro debut here. Fights under Joe Stevenson. Ilyas Fakiri 0-1, making his promotional debut. Not super like hyped to talk about this fight because it ended in a no contest due to an accidental groin kick from Chris Owen. Just one groin kick, and Fakiri effectively called a doctor in for a groin kick, which whenever a doctor comes in for a groin kick, you know that it's going to stop because the fighter can't continue. There's nothing the doctor can do. He's not going to go there and start squeezing your nuts and tell you that you're okay to fight. It's not going to happen. So doctor came in and doctor was like, yeah, okay, you can't fight. You won't fight. Chris Owen looked good in round one. Yeah, impressed in round one, considering he's basically rolled off the couch, made his pro debut. But yeah, round two, you could see he started to get really laboured, breathing heavily. Ilyas Fakiri was doing some good stuff, like the calf kick was really good. But it was a very sloppy fight in round two. And actually, in all honesty, the groin kick probably saved us from like a really sluggish, lethargic, sloppy fight. So I won't complain there. And that wraps it up for Cage Warriors 173. Wish I had way more to talk about, but it was a card that had some exciting moments and then also had some moments that were just a bit, bleh. They weren't great, they weren't bad. If I had to give this card a score, I'd probably give it like a 6.5 out of 10 maybe. If you haven't watched the card but you're listening to me, which is quite unlikely because not a lot of people listen to this, and I'd assume most people who do are pretty avid followers of Cage Warriors, so they probably already have. But if you haven't, fights to go watch. Go watch Bruno Souza versus Wilson Hayes. Go watch Damon Wilson versus Brandon Carrillo, and go watch Xavier Vines versus Diego Bigelow. Catch up on all the finishes, and you'll be all good. If you want to get angry with judging and bad scorecards, go watch Javier Garcia versus Roberto Hernandez because I'm still not over that one. But yeah, it was a card that happened. It wasn't bad by any stretch. It wasn't amazing by any stretch. We'll probably forget about it in a few weeks. Outside of the performances that really kind of captivated me and the fights that captivated me as well. If you guys enjoyed listening to this, as always, you can leave a review on Spotify. You can leave a review on Apple. Please do that because I think only like a handful of people have done it on either one. It really helps. Pod is also on YouTube, so you can subscribe, like, comment. If you're on Insta, you're on Twitter, just share it. A quick retweet or a quick, share to your stories for the pod genuinely really helps kind of branch out into new audiences and being able to get new people listening. Again, I don't make a penny off this pod, so it's a passion project. The more people I can connect with on all things UK MMA, on all things Euro MMA, on all things Cage Warriors, that would make me very happy. We will chat again for Cage Warriors 174, which take place Saturday, July 20th in London, and I'm hoping I will be there, and it should be really fun. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you all then.